Bought my parents a new expensive car out of love. Now they expect me to pay for all its maintenance for $55,000, and then I'd been saving for a while, and it felt good to finally do something big for my parents. Cheryl and Greg, my mom and dad, weren't exactly struggling, but they'd been driving the same clunky, barely functioning car for years. You could hear that thing sputtering from a block away. Dad always joked about driving it until the wheels fell off, but I knew they just couldn't afford a new one. So, I decided to step in. I'm 28, doing decently well as a systems engineer. I'm not rolling in cash, but I've got a solid salary, and I'd been putting money aside for a while. A new car for them seemed like the perfect way to give back. I imagined the moment. Big red bow, their teary-eyed smiles, and the satisfaction of knowing I'd made their lives easier. It wasn't just about the car. It was about showing my appreciation for everything they'd done for me growing up. When I handed them the keys to a sleek, shiny new SUV, the look on their faces made every penny feel worth it. My mom gasped and started crying. Dad looked like a kid on Christmas morning. They hugged me so tight I thought my ribs might crack. "You didn't have to do this, Ryan," Mom said, her voice breaking. "I know," I replied, grinning, "but I wanted to." For the first few weeks, everything was great. They couldn't stop talking about how smooth it drove, how nice it was to finally have something reliable. Dad even called me once just to tell me about all the new tech features, like he was the one who'd paid for it. It felt good, really good. But then, the calls started coming. The first one was small. "Hey, Ryan," Mom said one evening, "do you think you could help us out with the insurance for the car? It's a bit higher than we expected. You know, because it's new and all." Sure," I said, caught off guard. It was my gift, after all. How could I say no? Then it was fuel. Dad called a few days later, grumbling about gas prices and how the new SUV guzzled more than their old car. "You know, son, I hate to ask, but if you could just spot us some cash for gas this month, it'd really help." Again, I said yes. I started to notice a pattern. Every week, there was something new. First, it was a subscription for the navigation system. Then, a call about some all-weather floor mats because the ones that came with the car weren't great. And then, the kicker. "Ryan, honey," Mom said sweetly one Sunday morning, "your dad thinks we should get the windows tinted. It's so hot in the summer, and the dealership said they'd do it for just a few $100s. You don't mind covering that, do you?" I hesitated. "You guys don't really need tinted windows, though, right?" "Oh, come on," Dad chimed in, taking the phone. "It's your gift to us. You wouldn't want us to be uncomfortable, would you?" That comment rubbed me the wrong way, but I caved. "Fine," I said, trying to keep my frustration in check. I told myself they were just adjusting to having a new car. They'd never had anything so nice before, so maybe they didn't realize how much they were asking of me. But it didn't stop. 2 months later, I got a call that left me fuming. "Ryan, we hit a little pothole, and there's something wrong with the alignment," Dad said casually. "The mechanic says it's an easy fix, but it's gonna run about $400. Can you send that over?" "Wait, a pothole? How hard did you hit it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Not that hard," Dad replied quickly. "It's no big deal." But it was a big deal, to me at least. This was supposed to be a gift, not a financial black hole. I'd already spent more on maintenance and extras in a few months than I ever anticipated. When I mentioned this to my girlfriend, Emma, she gave me a look that said I told you so. "Ryan, you're too nice for your own good," she said, leaning back on the couch. "You gave them a car that should have been the end of it. They're taking advantage of you." "They're not taking advantage of me," I shot back, though even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. Emma raised an eyebrow. "So, they're just, what? Conveniently forgetting they're adults who can take care of themselves?" I didn't have an answer. The truth was, I was starting to feel resentful. Every time my phone buzzed, I'd get this sinking feeling in my gut, wondering what they'd ask for next. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was the way they expected it, like it was my responsibility to keep their gift running. I tried to bring it up with them once, but Mom got defensive immediately. "Ryan, we didn't ask for the car," she said. "You're the one who gave it to us. Isn't it a little unfair to get upset when we need help with something you decided to buy?" I didn't know how to respond. Maybe she had a point. Or maybe I just made a huge mistake. Either way, I had a bad feeling this wasn't the last phone call I'd be getting. A few weeks passed, and I was still stewing over the last phone call. I'd started screening my parents' calls just to avoid another small favor. It wasn't like I hated them or anything. Far from it. I love my parents. But every time my phone lit up with Mom or Dad, I felt my jaw clench, wondering what they'd need this time. Then, on a quiet Saturday morning, my phone buzzed again. It was Dad. I let it go to voicemail, figuring I'd deal with it later. But then he called again, and again. By the fourth call, I gave in, my stomach churning with annoyance. Dad, what's going on? I asked, trying to keep my voice even. Ryan, thank God you picked up, he said, his tone urgent. We had a little accident. What kind of accident? My heart sank. I immediately pictured the SUV totaled, my bank account spiraling down with it. It's not that bad, he assured me, though his voice wavered. I scraped the side of the car against a guardrail. The dealership says the repairs are going to cost about $1,200. Asterisk $1,200? Asterisk, I blurted out. What were you even doing? Dad hesitated. Just a little day trip. Your mom and I wanted to test out the all-wheel drive. I closed my eyes, trying to keep my temper in check. So, let me guess. You want me to pay for it? Well, he started, dragging out the word. It is your gift to us, Ryan. And we wouldn't have had this problem if we were still driving the old car. That was the last straw. Dad, I said sharply, cutting him off. I gave you the car because I wanted to help. But this constant expectation that I'll cover every little thing, isn't fair. I'm not a bank. There was a long pause on the other end. Then, he sighed. I didn't mean to make you feel like that, son. But you have to understand. Things are tight for us. Things are tight? That was rich coming from the guy who just spent God knows how much on custom rims and tinted windows. I wanted to scream, but instead, I just said, I'll think about it, and hung up. That night, I vented to Emma over dinner. She was less than sympathetic. Ryan, this isn't healthy, she said, poking at her salad. They're guilting you into paying for things you shouldn't have to. At what point do you draw the line? I sighed, leaning back in my chair. They're my parents, Em. I can't just say no. Why not? She shot back. You're allowed to have boundaries. Hell, you need them. Otherwise, they're just going to keep taking and taking until you have nothing left to give. Her words stuck with me, but it wasn't that simple. Saying no to your parents, especially when they've always been there for you, felt like a betrayal. But Emma wasn't wrong either. I was starting to feel like I dug myself into a hole I couldn't climb out of. A week later, I drove out to my parents' house to talk things over. I figured a face-to-face conversation would be better than another frustrating phone call. As soon as I pulled into the driveway, I saw the SUV gleaming in the sunlight, its brand-new rims catching the light. The sight made my blood boil. Mom greeted me at the door with a warm smile, as if nothing was wrong. Ryan, we weren't expecting you. Yeah, well, I muttered, stepping inside. I thought we should talk. Dad was in the living room, pretending to watch TV but clearly aware of the tension in the air. I sat down on the couch, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Look, I started. I need to set some boundaries. I can't keep paying for every little thing that comes up with the car. Mom's smile faltered. Ryan, we're not trying to take advantage of you. But you know how expensive things are these days. Exactly, I interrupted. And I have expenses too. You think I don't have bills to pay? Savings goals? Just because I can afford to help doesn't mean I should have to. Dad looked away, his jaw tightening. Mom, on the other hand, leaned forward, her eyes glistening with tears. Ryan, we're not asking because we want to. We're asking because we need to. I sighed, feeling my resolve waver. Maybe you do, but this has to stop. You can't keep expecting me to bail you out. It's not fair. That's when Zoe, my younger sister, walked in. She was 22, still living at home, and rarely involved in family arguments. But today, she decided to chime in. Seriously, Ryan, she said, crossing her arms. You're acting like they're asking for millions. You can afford it. Why wouldn't you want to help your family? My head snapped toward her. Zoe, this isn't about whether I can afford it. It's about the principle. They're adults. They should be able to take care of themselves, and they've taken care of you your whole life, she shot back. Or have you forgotten that? Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood up, my chest tight with anger and frustration. This conversation is going nowhere. I'll cover the repairs this time, but after that, you're on your own. I left without waiting for a response. As I drove back to my apartment, my mind raced with a mix of guilt, anger, and confusion. Zoe's words lingered, making me question whether I was being selfish or just finally standing up for myself. The next day, Emma noticed I was quieter than usual. Did you talk to them? She asked softly. Yeah, I muttered. It didn't go great. She frowned, reaching for my hand. Ryan, you're not a bad son for wanting boundaries. They need to understand that. I know, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. Deep down, I had a feeling this was only the beginning. After my talk with my parents, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd finally gotten the message. For a few weeks, things were quiet. No calls asking for help with insurance. No texts about upgrades. Just silence. At first, it was a relief. I could breathe again. But as the days went on, the silence felt ominous, like the calm before a storm. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, while I was at work, my phone buzzed. It was Zoe. Hey, she said, her tone casual but laced with something that made me uneasy. Just wanted to let you know Mom and Dad took out a loan. I sat up straight. A loan? For what? For the car. She replied like it was the most obvious thing in the world. They're getting some work done on it. New tires, upgraded suspension, stuff like that. I could feel my blood pressure rising. Wait, what? They're upgrading the car? Again? I told them I wasn't paying for any more of that crap. Relax, she said, her voice annoyingly calm. They're not asking you to pay for it this time. They're covering it themselves. With a loan, I shot back. Zoe, do you even realize how ridiculous that is? They're sinking themselves into debt for a car I bought them. Well, maybe if you weren't being so stingy, they wouldn't have to. That was it. I snapped. Stingy? Are you kidding me? I've already spent thousands on that car. How is it my responsibility to keep throwing money at it just because they can't manage their own finances? Zoe sighed, clearly tired of the argument. Look, Ryan, they're our parents. They've done so much for us. The least you could do is be grateful and help out a little more. Before I could say something I'd regret, I hung up. That weekend, I drove back to my parents' house, determined to get to the bottom of this. When I pulled into the driveway, the SUV wasn't there. Instead, Mom was on the porch, sipping tea like it was a lazy Sunday morning. Where's the car? I asked as I got out of my own. She looked up, startled. Oh, hi, Ryan. It's at the shop. Why? The shop. I repeated, my voice rising. For what? She hesitated. Just some upgrades. Your father thought it'd be a good idea. A good idea? I laughed bitterly. You're taking out loans for good ideas now? Mom bristled. Ryan, you need to calm down. We're handling it. No, you're not. I shouted. You're piling on debt for something that doesn't even matter. Do you realize how irresponsible that is? Before she could respond, Dad came out of the house, his face dark with anger. What's all this yelling about? I turned to him, my frustration boiling over. What the hell are you two thinking? Taking out a loan for car upgrades? Are you trying to ruin yourselves financially? Dad's jaw tightened. Don't you dare lecture me about finances, Ryan. You don't know what it's like to scrape by every month. Oh, give me a break. I shot back. You wouldn't be scraping by if you didn't blow money on stupid crap like rims and tinted windows. His face turned red, and for a moment, I thought he might actually hit me. Instead, he took a step back and said, You have no idea what we've been through. You think you're so high and mighty because you make a good salary, but you don't understand the sacrifices we've made for you and Zoe. Sacrifices? I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. Dad, this isn't about sacrifices. This is about you refusing to take responsibility for your actions. Mom started crying at this point, and Zoe appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, looking like she was ready to jump into the fight. "You've changed, Ryan," Zoe said, her voice cold. "You used to care about this family. Now all you care about is yourself." Her words stung, but I didn't back down. Caring about this family doesn't mean letting you all bleed me dry. I have my own life, my own responsibilities. I can't keep bailing you out every time you make a bad decision. That's when Mom said something that hit me like a punch to the gut. "We only took the loan because your father needed the money for something else." I froze. "What do you mean, something else?" Mom glanced at Dad, who looked away, his face tense. "It's nothing," Dad said quickly. "It's not nothing," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "What's going on?" There was a long, uncomfortable silence. Finally, Mom whispered, "Your father. He's been having some trouble with gambling." My mind reeled. "Gambling? Are you serious?" Dad's shoulders slumped, and for the first time, he looked genuinely ashamed. "It's not what you think. I've just been trying to get us out of this hole. I thought I could win back what we've lost." "What you've lost?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "How much, Dad? How much are we talking here?" He didn't answer. "Answer me," I shouted. Mom sobbed harder, and Zoe looked away, her expression unreadable. Finally, Dad muttered, "About $15,000. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. $15,000. That was more than half my savings. "And you're taking out loans for car upgrades while you're $15,000 in the hole?" I said, my voice rising again. "Are you completely out of your mind?" "It's not that simple, Ryan," Mom said, her voice pleading. "He's been trying to fix it, but it's hard. We didn't want to burden you." "Didn't want to burden me?" I laughed bitterly. "What the hell do you think you've been doing all this time?" I stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I got into my car and drove away. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing for sure. Something had to change. I couldn't think straight. My dad was in $15,000 of gambling debt. My mom had been covering for him, and my sister somehow thought I was the bad guy in all of this. I spent that night tossing and turning, replaying every interaction I'd had with my parents over the past few months. All the money I'd sent them, the guilt trips, the constant calls. It all made sense now. The car wasn't just a gift to them. It had become a band-aid, a shiny distraction from a much bigger problem. After leaving my parents' house, I thought I was done for the day. I'd said my piece, and the ball was in their court now. But life has a way of throwing you curveballs when you least expect them. I'd barely been home for an hour when my phone rang. It was Zoe. "What now?" I muttered under my breath before answering. "Zoe, I'm really not in the mood." "Ryan, you need to come back here," she said, her voice trembling. My heart skipped a beat. "What's going on?" "There's someone here. A man. He's asking for Dad. He's saying some really scary stuff." "What kind of stuff?" I asked, already grabbing my keys. "Something about money and payments," she said, her voice cracking. "I don't know, Ryan. He looks dangerous." "I'm on my way," I said, hanging up before she could say more. The drive back to my parents' house felt like it took forever, even though I was speeding the whole way. My mind raced with possibilities. Who was this guy? A debt collector? A friend of my dad's? Or someone worse? When I pulled into the driveway, I saw an unfamiliar black car parked out front. The man Zoe had mentioned was standing on the porch, leaning against the railing like he owned the place. He was in his 40s, stocky, with a shaved head and a face that looked like it had seen its fair share of bar fights. My mom was standing in the doorway, wringing her hands nervously. I got out of the car and approached the porch, my stomach in knots. "Who the hell are you?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. The man turned to me, his expression calm but menacing. "You must be Ryan. Your dad's boy. Heard a lot about you." "Yeah? Well, I haven't heard a thing about you," I said, stepping closer. "What do you want?" "Just here to have a little chat with your old man," he said, his tone casual. "He owes me some money." Thought I'd drop by and remind him. My mom let out a shaky breath. "Greg's not here right now. He went out." "Save it," the man interrupted, holding up a hand. "I know he's hiding. Doesn't matter. You're his family, which makes this your problem too." I clenched my fists, trying to stay calm. How much does he owe you? 15 large, the man said, his eyes narrowing. And he's late on his payments. Real late. And showing up here is supposed to solve that? I asked. Look, I don't know what kind of arrangement you had with him, but this isn't our problem. You deal with him, not us. The man chuckled, a low, dangerous sound. See, that's not how it works. Your dad borrowed the money, but if he can't pay, someone's got to step up. Otherwise, he let the sentence hang, his meaning clear. Otherwise what? I asked, my voice shaking with anger. He leaned closer, his smile fading. Let's just say things get unpleasant. For everyone. I felt a surge of panic, but I couldn't let him see it. Look, I don't have that kind of money, and even if I did, I wouldn't give it to you. You want your 15 grand? Go find my dad. He smirked, clearly enjoying my defiance. Fair enough. But you might want to have a little chat with him yourself. Tell him time's running out. I'd hate to have to come back here. He turned and walked back to his car, his footsteps heavy on the porch. I watched him drive off, my heart pounding in my chest. Inside, my mom was sitting on the couch, her face pale and her hands shaking. Zoe was pacing the living room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Who was that guy? I demanded, turning to Mom. She shook her head. I don't know. Greg never told me who he borrowed the money from. Are you serious? I shouted. You don't even know who you're dealing with? This isn't some bank loan, Mom. This is a freaking loan shark. Don't yell at her. Zoe snapped, glaring at me. She's scared enough as it is. We should all be scared. I shot back. This isn't just about money anymore. These people don't play by the rules. If Dad doesn't pay, they'll come after all of us. Mom started crying, and Zoe looked away, her expression tense. I sat down, running a hand through my hair. My mind was racing. How had things gotten this bad without anyone telling me? What are we going to do? Zoe asked finally, her voice small. I don't know, I admitted. But one thing's for sure. Dad can't keep running from this. He needs to face it, and he needs to do it now. The next morning, I called my best friend, Jason. He's the kind of guy who always knows what to say, even when you don't want to hear it. Dude, Jason said after I explained everything, this is next level messed up. You need to set some serious boundaries, like yesterday. I've tried, I said, pacing my living room. They just keep finding new ways to push. And now this gambling thing. How am I supposed to deal with that? They're my parents. Jason sighed. I get it, man. But at some point, you have to decide if you're going to keep letting them drag you into their mess. Otherwise, it's going to ruin you. Yeah, but what if they can't handle it on their own? I asked, running a hand through my hair. What if this just makes things worse? That's not your responsibility, Jason said firmly. You didn't cause this, and you can't fix it for them. They need to figure it out themselves. I decided I needed more answers before making any decisions. That afternoon, I went back to my parents' house, determined to get the full story. When I walked in, they both looked at me like they'd been expecting a fight. Ryan, Mom started, her voice hesitant. We know you're upset. Upset? I interrupted, my voice cold. I'm beyond upset. Dad's in 15 grand of gambling debt, and you've been covering for him with loans for car upgrades. Do you even realize how insane that sounds? Dad shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding my eyes. It's not as bad as it sounds. Oh, really? I shot back. Because it sounds like you've been lying to me for months, while digging yourselves deeper into a hole you can't climb out of. We didn't lie, Mom said quickly. We just didn't tell you everything. I laughed bitterly. Right. Because that's so much better. There was a tense silence before Dad finally spoke. Look, I screwed up. I've been trying to fix it, but it's not easy. Gambling isn't just about the money. It's an addiction. I froze. Addiction. The word hung in the air like a weight. I'd heard about gambling addiction before, but I never thought it would hit this close to home. I've been going to meetings, Dad continued, his voice quiet. Gamblers Anonymous. I've been trying to get clean, but it's hard. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream at him for dragging us all into this mess, but another part of me felt, sympathy, maybe even a little guilt. Had I been too hard on him? So, what's the plan? I asked, crossing my arms. How are you going to pay off this debt? We're working on it, Mom said, though her tone wasn't exactly convincing. We've been talking to the bank about a consolidation loan, a loan to cover another loan, I muttered, shaking my head. That's not a solution. It's just kicking the can down the road. Dad looked at me, his expression a mix of shame and desperation. I know we've messed up, Ryan, but we need your help. Just this once. There it was again. That expectation. That guilt. My chest tightened as I struggled to find the right words. I can't keep doing this, I said finally, my voice cracking. I can't keep bailing you out every time you make a bad decision. I'm not your safety net. Mom started crying, and Dad looked away, his jaw tight. Zoe, who'd been listening from the kitchen, stormed into the room. You're unbelievable, she said, glaring at me. They've been there for you your whole life, and now, when they need you the most, you're turning your back on them? I stared at her, my anger bubbling to the surface. This isn't about turning my back on them, Zoe. It's about finally holding them accountable. If they don't face the consequences of their actions, they're never going to change. Consequences? She scoffed. You're talking like they're criminals. They're our parents, Ryan. They deserve our support. No, I said firmly. What they deserve is to fix the mess they created. And if you're so eager to help, maybe you should step up for once instead of always expecting me to handle everything. Zoe's face turned red, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. After I left, I felt like I was carrying a 100-pound weight on my chest. I knew I'd done the right thing, but it didn't make it any easier. That night, I told Emma everything. She listened quietly, her hand resting on mine. You did the right thing, she said when I finished. They need to take responsibility for their actions. It's not your job to save them, but what if they can't? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Emma squeezed my hand. Then they'll have to learn. The hard way, maybe, but they'll learn. Her words gave me some comfort, but deep down, I knew this wasn't over. My parents weren't the kind of people to give up easily, especially when it came to asking for my help. For the next few days, I waited for the fallout. I knew my parents wouldn't just let this go, and sure enough, the first sign of trouble came in the form of a text from Zoe. Zoe asterisk, nice job, Ryan. Mom hasn't stopped crying since you left. Hope you're happy. I didn't reply. I didn't know how to. A part of me wanted to call and apologize, but another part knew I'd done the right thing. It didn't matter how much guilt they threw at me. I wasn't going to let them drag me back into their mess. Then, 2 nights later, my mom called. Against my better judgment, I answered. Ryan, she said, her voice trembling. I'm sorry about everything. I know we've been asking too much of you. Her tone caught me off guard. I was expecting more guilt, more defensiveness. Instead, she sounded sincere. I just want to understand, she continued. Why do you feel like you can't help us anymore? I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. It's not that I don't want to help, Mom. It's that I can't keep doing it at the expense of my own life. Every time you ask me for money, it puts me in a tough spot. I have my own bills to pay, my own future to think about. There was a long pause before she spoke again. We never meant to put you in this position. Your dad and I thought we were doing what was best for the family, but I can see now that we've made things worse. Her words were a step in the right direction, but I wasn't convinced. I'd heard too many apologies, too many promises to change. This time, I needed action. So what are you going to do about it? I asked. What's the plan? Mom hesitated, then said, We've decided to sell the car. I nearly dropped the phone. Wait, what? Are you serious? Yes, she said, her voice steady. It's clear we can't afford to keep it. Your father's going to call the dealership tomorrow to see what they can do. Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with disbelief. After months of fighting me on every little expense, they were finally taking responsibility. It felt too good to be true. What about Dad's gambling? I asked. Is he still going to those meetings? Yes, she said firmly. He's committed to getting better. I know it won't be easy, but we're going to figure this out. Together. The next week, Dad called me to let me know the dealership had agreed to buy the car back, though at a significant loss. It wasn't ideal, but it was a start. For the first time in months, I felt like they were finally taking steps to fix their situation without dragging me into it. But things weren't magically fixed overnight. Selling the car and going to meetings didn't erase the debt or the strain it had put on our family. It would take time, probably a long time, for them to rebuild their finances and regain my trust. Still, it was a step forward, and that was more than I'd expected. Meanwhile, things with Emma had taken a turn for the better. Now that I wasn't constantly stressed about my parents, I could finally focus on our relationship. One night, over dinner, she brought up something I hadn't thought about before. "You know," she said, twirling her fork in her pasta, "this whole thing with your parents has been hard, but I think it's taught you something important." "Yeah?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Boundaries," she said simply. "You're learning how to put yourself first. That's not selfish, Ryan. It's healthy." Her words stuck with me. For so long, I'd felt like I was being selfish for saying no, but maybe she was right. Maybe standing up for myself wasn't just about protecting my finances. It was about protecting my mental health, too. Over the next few months, things started to settle down. My parents were still struggling to pay off their debts, but they'd stopped asking me for money. Dad stayed committed to his recovery, attending weekly meetings and working with a financial counselor to get back on track. Mom found a part-time job to help with the bills, something she hadn't done in years. Zoe, on the other hand, wasn't thrilled with the new dynamic. She called me a few times to complain about how hard things had gotten without the car, but I stood my ground. If she wanted to help, she was more than capable of stepping up herself. As for me, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in months. Without the constant financial drain, I was finally able to focus on my own goals. I started saving for a down payment on a house, something Emma and I had talked about for a while. For the first time, I felt like my life was moving forward instead of being stuck in a cycle of obligation. Looking back, I realized this whole ordeal had taught me more than just the importance of boundaries. It had taught me that love doesn't mean sacrificing yourself for someone else's mistakes. It means being there for the people you care about, but also knowing when to step back and let them take responsibility for their actions. I still loved my parents, and I always would. But now, I loved myself enough to say no when I needed to. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough.